Imagine this scenario for a second. You've just spent, I don't know, weeks, maybe even months, surviving this incredibly grueling multi-round interview process.
The absolute worst.
Right. I mean, you've answered the behavioral questions, you've done the case studies, you've negotiated the salary, and you finally sign that offer letter, and the relief is just immense.
You feel like you've crossed the finish line.
Exactly. You have successfully landed a freely specialized role at a prestigious foreign multinational company. So you walk into the office on day one, you've got your new coffee mug, your desk is set up, and you are just completely ready to flex your hard-earned expertise.
Ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah. You sit down with the HR director, fully expecting to get your project roadmap and your KPIs. But instead, they look you dead in the eye and say, well, we really value flexibility here. You'll need to adapt to multitasking and being moved around based on what the company needs today.
Oh, wow.
And just like that, the highly specific job description that you applied for practically becomes a work of fiction.
It is the ultimate corporate bait and switch.
Totally.
I mean, it really is. And what makes this deep dive so compelling is that we're pulling from this truly fascinating stack of material today. We've got a deeply detailed personal workplace memoir, some corporate hierarchy research, and cross-cultural HR data.
Which a lot to unpack.
It is, yeah. But we're using all of it to unpack a real-world case study. Because this isn't just some hypothetical nightmare scenario. We're looking at the documented journey of a professional who lasted less than a year at one of these foreign multinational corporations. And we're going to extract the hard-won lessons from that experience.
Because our mission today is to look way beyond just a simple story about a bad job or, a toxic boss.
Right.
When we synthesize these materials, what really emerges is a masterclass in navigating the invisible cultural boundaries that exist in the modern workplace. We're dissecting cross-cultural communication, the crushing reality of navigating toxic reporting structures, and ultimately knowing exactly when it's time to walk away from a role without torching your own career.
We're talking about the fundamental clash of expectations. And to understand that clash, we really have to look at the immediate disconnect that happened on this employee's very first day. The materials show this individual was hired specifically for their deep professional expertise as a project manager.
Right, and anyone who operates in that space knows PM work is fundamentally about structure, risk mitigation, and driving highly specific operational outcomes.
Exactly.
But then HR drops that flexible bomb. Due to some sudden, totally opaque company strategy changes, this employee isn't just asked to manage a slightly different portfolio of projects. They are suddenly pushed into a business development and sales role.
Which is a massive jump.
Yeah. Going from PM to BD is a 90-degree shift in professional mindset. I mean, You're moving from internal structural optimization to external relationship selling and revenue hunting. Those are completely different operational beasts.
What's fascinating here is how different corporate cultures fundamentally define the concept of a human asset. Because if we look at the internal data in the employee's notes, this particular company genuinely believes they value their employees.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they don't view themselves as a sweatshop at all. They view their employees as valuable assets that need to be nurtured over the long term. But, and this is the key, their cultural definition of nurturing means demanding extreme, unconditional flexibility.
Okay, let's unpack this because it feels entirely contradictory. It's like auditioning to be the lead cellist in a world-class orchestra. You get the part, you show up on opening night, and the conductor hands you a trombone and says, well, we really value your flexibility as a musician.
Right.
I mean, how is anyone supposed to succeed in that environment? You spent your entire career perfecting the cello, and now you're being evaluated on your ability to play brass.
That is the perfect analogy to highlight the friction here. Because in the employee's mind and, in prevailing Western or highly specialized corporate cultures, an asset is a highly tuned, specialized tool. You hire a scalpel to do a surgeon's job.
Right. You don't use a scalpel to hammer a nail.
Exactly. But in this specific multinational's culture, an asset is viewed as a raw resource. It's raw clay. To the home office, a good employee is one who is ready to be deployed and molded into whatever shape the company requires at that exact moment.
Regardless of what they actually know how to do.
Completely, regardless of the employee's actual background, their professional identity, or their career trajectory.
Which implies that the company wasn't intentionally trying to be malicious, right, or set this person up to fail on day one. They were simply operating on a completely different cultural operating system.
Yes.
And what stands out in the memoir is that the employee recognized this. Since he couldn't just magically change his role back to PM, he didn't throw a tantrum. He didn't immediately quit. He genuinely tried to hack the environment and adapt to this new system.
He really did. He made a highly calculated professional effort to assimilate. When faced with an immovable structure, he attempted to use soft skills to penetrate it.
You can see him actively trying to decode his direct supervisor's preferred cultural language and communication style. And we aren't talking about literally learning a new spoken language, obviously. We're talking about the unwritten rules of corporate engagement.
Right, the subtext.
Yeah, like, how does this boss prefer to be addressed? How are ideas pitched? He went out of his way to build informal, positive relationships. Whenever he traveled, he would bring back these small, local Taiwanese souvenirs.
Oh, the OMG gifts.
Yes, the kind of thoughtful, hyper-local gifts that usually make people go, OMG, that is so cool. And he would strategically give them to upper management and his peers. He was actively trying to build human bridges across a structural divide.
And in many corporate cultures, that kind of proactive relationship building is exactly how you gain trust. You soften rigid hierarchies, you open up informal channels of communication, you build the social capital first, so you can spend it on operational leverage later.
But he hit a massive brick wall.
A total dead end.
Despite all of this high-level emotional intelligence and relationship building, his direct supervisor gave him absolutely zero positive feedback, no proactive guidance on how to actually succeed in this newly mandated BD role. And worse, the supervisor actively withheld the internal resources and budget he needed to execute the strategy.
And to top it all off, the reporting structure was painfully rigid. The rigidity is really the defining feature of his day-to-day misery. I mean, he couldn't just walk over to another department's desk to collaborate or ask a quick question.
No. He had to report upwards to his direct supervisor just to get formal permission to contact the other people within the company he needed to work with. It was an incredibly siloed, almost militaristic environment.
It's exhausting.
He quickly realized he was completely shut out of the actual decision-making circle. The established company culture ultimately only trusted their own people, meaning folks from the home country or those who had fully surrendered their professional autonomy. They treated this localized hire, this supposed expert they spent months recruiting, like a mere external consultant.
Yeah, his notes have this brilliant visual for it.
The sand.
Yeah, the layer of sand. He felt like management and the local hires were separated by a thick layer of sand. Any initiative he pushed forward just lost all its momentum and died in the sand.
That metaphor perfectly encapsulates the friction, but I am really struggling to understand the business logic here. Multinationals do not become global behemoths by being fundamentally stupid or burning cash on talent they don't use.
Right, obviously not.
So what is the hidden ROI for them in treating a highly paid, localized expert like a pawn? Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If a multinational company goes out of its way to hire a local expert, why intentionally freeze them out of the actual decision-making process? Isn't that entirely counterproductive? What are we missing?
It's a great question, and it raises one of the most important points about how global companies attempt to expand. If we connect this to the broader research on multinational corporate structures, foreign branches very often operate with a deep-seated institutional protectionist mindset. Headquarters desires local market presence and local revenue, but they are absolutely terrified of losing control over the brand and the operational methodology.
So it's a paradox. They want the local money, but they reject the local methods.
Precisely. They value strict hierarchy, predictable reporting lines, and familiar cultural ties far more than they value the localized expertise they supposedly hired the person for.
Yeah.
They want local market access, but they demand it be executed exactly according to their home country playbook.
Even if that playbook makes absolutely zero sense in the new market.
Exactly. When the local expert suggests a different, more efficient way of doing things, which is, exactly what they were hired to do, the corporate immune system rejects it as a threat to the established hierarchy. The supervisor withholding resources isn't just being difficult, they are gatekeeping power to ensure the home office methodology remains supreme.
Wow. That completely changes the dynamic. It means that no matter what our employee did, no matter how many souvenirs he brought or how hard he worked, the system was intrinsically designed to keep him at arm's length.
Built to resist him.
Which brings us to the climax of this entire journey. He has hit the wall. The final straw is the direct supervisor's stubborn, continued refusal to provide any feedback or resources. He realizes the situation is entirely unsalvageable. Now, at this point, I feel like the natural human reaction is to just rage quit. Grab your mug and walk out.
Well, absolutely. It would be the natural emotional response, certainly. The psychological toll of expending massive amounts of energy just to be ignored is profound.
But leaving a job in under a year looks notoriously bad on a professional resume. It raises immediate red flags for future hiring managers. So he didn't let emotion drive his exit strategy. He utilized a highly rational, almost clinical approach. The material details how he applied a PDCA method plan, do, check, act to audit his own career trajectory within this company.
And applying a manufacturing quality control framework like PDCA to personal career management is incredibly insightful.
It really is. And he did it by taking what he called a 270-degree perspective. I want to dig into how he actually did this because it's brilliant. If a standard, healthy corporate performance review is a 360-degree view, meaning you get feedback from all sides, a 270-degree perspective means you are intentionally blinding out the top 90 degrees.
Toxic boss.
Exactly. He looked at his relationships with his peers, his interactions with cross-functional teams, and his own raw output metrics, completely isolating his direct supervisor out of the equation.
Because by removing the supervisor from the audit, he removed the primary source of the structural friction. And the conclusion he arrived at through that specific check phase of the PDCA analysis is really the emotional core of this entire case study. He recognized with hard data that this job was causing a massive loss of energy, but it did not represent a failure of his own internal capability.
That distinction between energy and capability is so vital. I mean, a whole year of immense effort yielded zero top-level recognition, no promotions, and no successful project launches. A lesser professional would have internalized that lack of output as, I am an imposter, I am bad at my job, I can't cut it in the big leagues.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the emotional intelligence required to separate your inherent professional capability from a toxic work environment is staggering. He realized that spending 40 hours a week just fighting a culture that fundamentally didn't want his expertise wasn't making him less competent. It was simply draining his battery to absolute zero.
Yeah, just fighting the tide every day.
Exactly. A toxic culture demands so much defensive energy, just trying to get permission to send an email or trying to secure a basic budget, that you have zero productive energy left to actually do the job.
And amazingly, because he framed it this way, he still viewed this incredibly painful, frustrating year as a net gain in his overall capability. He walked away knowing that he now truly understood the brutal realities of foreign corporate culture and protectionist management. That painful knowledge would actually drastically improve his resume and make him vastly sharper in future interviews.
There's that beautiful quote in his notes. Right?
Yes. Wherever you go, you leave a trace. Even a perceived failure leaves a trace of new, hard-won knowledge.
It's a masterclass in psychological reframing. He took a situation that could have easily destroyed his confidence for years and actively turned it into a strategic, protective asset for the rest of his career.
He even went a step further to prove to himself that the situation was the problem, not him. Before officially submitting his resignation, he defined 3 strict, non-negotiable conditions. If the company could meet these 3 conditions, he would stay and keep fighting. Number 1, he needed a leader to actually give him clear, actionable direction rather than vague demands for flexibility.
Reasonable.
Number 2, he needed a formalized 3 to 6 month grace period to properly learn and adapt to the BD role he was forced into. And number 3, which I think is the most innovative idea in this entire duck dive, he requested a cultural coach to help him navigate and avoid the invisible workplace landmines.
That third condition, the cultural coach, it really highlights exactly what is missing in almost all global onboarding processes. He knew he didn't need a skills coach to teach him how to use software or make a sales call. He needed a sociological translator. He needed someone native to the home office's culture to explain the unwritten rules of their specific corporate hierarchy.
But obviously, the company didn't provide any of that, which led to his resignation. But before we get to the final survival guide from the materials, so what does this all mean for the listener? If they don't have a literal cultural coach, how can they perform that PDCA analysis on their own career right now?
Well, you start by ruthlessly analyzing where your daily friction is actually coming from. If we apply the check phase of the PDCA framework to, say, a mid-career crisis, you have to step back and objectively ask yourself, are you failing to hit targets because you fundamentally lack the technical skills to do the work? Or are you failing because the environment actively prevents you from executing the work?
That's a huge distinction.
It is. Because if you are constantly exhausted, but your actual output in those rare moments when you are fully allowed to do your job without interference is high quality, you're experiencing an energy drain, not a capability deficit.
That is the ultimate reality check. Speaking of reality checks, we have to talk about how this employee actually wrapped up his time there. During his postmortem analysis, he did something most people are terrified to do. He went back to the HR director, the one who told him to be flexible on day one, to finally demand an explanation for the massive disconnect.
Yes.
And surprisingly, HR actually gave him the brutal, unvarnished truth about how their machine works.
Which is incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Usually exit interviews are heavily sanitized, legally defensive exercises where HR just nods, smiles, and files the paperwork away.
But this HR director laid the entire operating system bare. They explicitly told him that in this company's culture, decisions absolutely must come from the supervisor. It is structurally forbidden for strategic decisions to originate from the localized employee.
Wow.
Furthermore, employees must accept being deployed as resources without question or pushback. Whether you have the decade of professional background required for the new task or not, when the company says jump to sales, you jump to sales.
It perfectly confirms the core thesis we unpacked earlier regarding the protectionist mindset. The Home Office does not hire local experts to tell headquarters what to do. They hire local human resources to execute the supervisor's top-down vision, no matter how objectively flawed or culturally tone-deaf that vision might be in the new market.
It's incredible that HR basically admitted out loud that the system is designed to ignore his expertise. It just proves that you can't outwork a bad system. You can bring all the local souvenirs you want. You can learn all the soft skills in the world. But if the foundational rules of the corporate operating system dictate that your localized knowledge is a threat to our hierarchy, you will never win.
You won't. And arriving at that realization is really the cornerstone of the survival guide this employee compiled based on his experience. He synthesized his failure into highly actionable, preventative advice for anyone navigating or interviewing for these types of complex multinational roles.
Let's walk through that survival guide because this is the armor you need for your next interview. Advice number 1. During your interview process, you need to intensely scrutinize the gap between the big boss's management style and your direct supervisor's style.
This is perhaps the most common trap ambitious professionals fall into. The big boss, the regional director, or the hiring manager might sell you an incredibly compelling vision of innovation, autonomy, and psychological safety. But your direct supervisor, the person reviewing your daily work, might be a rigid micromanager who demands absolute, unquestioning obedience.
Which changes everything.
Exactly. Your daily reality, your energy levels, and your career progression are dictated entirely by your direct supervisor, not the CEO's glossy corporate mandate. If you detect a massive philosophical gap between those two layers of management during the interview, you are the one who will fall into the chasm between them.
Advice number 2. You must repeatedly and aggressively confirm if your specific role is subject to drastic changes. If you are hired to be a project manager, you have to ask directly, under what circumstances will I be expected to pivot entirely to business development or sales? Do not ever assume the job title on the offer letter is a binding operational contract.
You really have to proactively stress test their definition of flexibility before you sign. When a hiring manager says they want a flexible, dynamic candidate, ask them for a specific historical example of what that looked like in their department over the past year.
Oh, that's smart.
If their example is shifting a senior structural engineer to a cold-calling sales desk for 6 months, you have your warning. Their definition of flexibility is actually a demand for unconditional compliance.
Advice number 3. Use every modern tool at your disposal, like AI, or deeply tap into your professional network to thoroughly research a country's baseline corporate culture or a specific company's operating system before you accept an offer.
The asymmetry of information that used to protect toxic companies is gone. You are no longer flying blind. You can prompt an AI to break down the typical corporate hierarchy of a specific foreign multinational. Or you can leverage networks to find former employees who lasted less than 2 years at that branch.
Yeah.
Doing this rigorous due diligence is essentially building your own virtual cultural coach before you even set foot in the building.
And finally, compiling all these insights gives us the ultimate metric for knowing exactly when to pull the ripcord and leave a job. It is the definitive red line. You know your time is up when your direct supervisor stops listening to your input, stops supporting your initiatives, and shifts entirely into micromanagement. The employee's core takeaway was that in any collaborative or teamwork-driven environment, A boss's lack of support instantly invalidates all of your hard work.
It does.
It simply does not matter how brilliant your project analysis is if the only person with the authority to approve it refuses to even look at the data.
That is the ultimate clarifying takeaway from this entire stack of research. If you cannot adapt to a specific company's culture despite your absolute best, most strategic, highly professional efforts, it does not mean your abilities are poor. It just means you are a highly specialized, finely tuned tool trapped inside a factory that only knows how to process raw clay. You require an environment where open, honest push and pull discussions can actually lead to mutual optimized solutions. Without that top-down support, your individual brilliance is completely neutralized by the structure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the invisible boundaries of corporate culture, remember that a short, frustrating stint on a resume isn't a failure. It's not a black mark if you actively use it as a masterclass in learning exactly what you will not tolerate in a work environment. It becomes a critical data point in your own personal PDCA analysis. You went in, you checked the environment, you realized it was draining your energy without utilizing your capability, and you acted appropriately by systematically leaving a bad situation.
Exactly. And I want to leave you with a completely different angle to think about today, looking beyond just the survival of the individual employee. We spent this entire time talking about how to protect your own career from these environments, but zoom out and look at the multinational company itself.
Okay.
If this massive global corporation continues to treat highly specialized, localized experts like raw clay, if they constantly override vital local market knowledge with rigid home country hierarchy, at what point does their grand global expansion inevitably collapse under the weight of their own protectionism? Think about your current role right now. Are you experiencing a capability gain or just a slow energy drain? And more importantly, if you were forced to switch roles tomorrow, would your supervisor be your advocate or the one handing you the trombone?
Wow. If they are actively neutralizing the exact people they hire to help them grow, they're basically sabotaging their own future. That is an incredible question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those hard questions about the systems you operate in. Keep fiercely protecting your professional energy. We will catch you next time.